At Christmas, my sister-in-law laughed. He can't even afford a house, mocking my modest life in front of the guests. I smiled, and the next time at dinner I said, I own the house you all live in. The room was frozen silent, and then suddenly, you won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. And you should see where Kenneth lives, Kayla was saying as I returned from the bathroom, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when entertaining guests. A tiny one-bedroom apartment on the south side. Can you imagine? I froze in the doorway. 8 faces turned toward me, some smiling politely, others poorly concealing their amusement. The expensive chandelier cast warm light on expressions that suddenly seemed foreign. Dad, we were just discussing housing costs in Spokane, Bradley said, not quite meeting my eyes. His wine glass was nearly empty, his third of the evening. Were you? I settled back into my chair at the far end of their dining table, the one I'd helped purchase 3 years ago. And what conclusions did you reach? Kayla leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the china. Well, some people can adapt to any situation, can't they? Even when they can't afford a down payment on anything decent. The laughter started as nervous chuckles from the neighbors. Mrs. Patterson from next door shifted uncomfortably, but Kayla was just getting started. Bradley's father has been renting the same place for years now, she announced, gesturing dramatically. 1 bedroom, barely 600 square feet. The carpet's probably older than our marriage. Kayla, Bradley started, but she was performing now. And the neighborhood. You have to drive through it to believe it. I told Bradley we should help with a security deposit somewhere nicer, but she shrugged eloquently. My napkin was twisted tight in my lap. I'm quite comfortable where I am. Of course you are, Dad, Bradley said quickly. You've always been financially practical. Financially practical. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from blown candles. Around the table, faces showed varying degrees of pity and awkward fascination. These people, their friends, their neighbors, were being served my life as dinner entertainment. The thing is, Kayla continued, warming to her audience, some people just never learned to plan ahead, you know? Never built anything lasting. I stared at the centerpiece, holly and red ribbon arranged in a crystal bowl. Beautiful, expensive, paid for, indirectly by the man they were dissecting for sport. Kenneth's always been financially challenged, Bradley added, and there it was, the final nail. My own son, nodding along with his wife's performance, confirming to a room full of strangers that his father was a charity case. The radiator hissed in the corner. Someone coughed. Mrs. Patterson studied her dessert plate intensely. I stood slowly, placing my napkin beside my untouched slice of pie. Every eye followed my movement. Thank you for dinner. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Dad, you don't have to. I do, actually. I retrieved my coat from the hall closet, the same one where Bradley used to hang his high school letter jacket. Drive safely, everyone. The roads are getting slick. The cold hit me like a slap as I stepped outside. Snow had begun falling harder, coating my windshield in a thin layer of white. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, letting the engine warm up, watching their front window glow with holiday light and holiday laughter. The heater hadn't warmed up yet. The heater finally kicked in as I pulled onto Stevens Street. My hands had stopped shaking, replaced by something colder than the December air. Through the windshield, holiday decorations blurred past. Wreaths on doors, colored lights wrapped around porch railings, the comfortable glow of families who weren't performing cruelty for entertainment. I stopped at the red light on Division, watching a young couple hurry across the crosswalk, arms linked against the snow. They reminded me of Bradley and Kayla 5 years ago, when he'd first brought her home, before she'd learned to measure people by square footage and credit scores. The Morrison Construction Company sale had closed 3 years ago this month. December 15th, 2021. I could still picture Davidson's law office downtown, the mahogany conference table where Marcus Chen and I had shaken hands over $2.8 million. You built something impressive, Kenneth, he'd said. This company has real bones, unlike my son's opinion of his father. The light turned green. I drove past the Davenport Hotel, where Kayla and Bradley had held their wedding reception. $25,000 I'd written that check for. Watching her complain, it wasn't enough for the ice sculpture she'd wanted. Some families just have different priorities, she'd told her mother, not quite whispering. $45,000 for Bradley's college education, $60,000 for their house down payment, the same house where I'd just been served as tonight's entertainment. They'd never asked how a financially challenged man kept producing these amounts. They'd simply cashed the checks and moved on. My apartment building appeared through the snow, a modest 3-story brick structure with good bones of its own. I'd chosen it deliberately, close enough to downtown for convenience, quiet enough for thinking, small enough to avoid the complications that money could bring to family relationships. Clearly, that strategy had backfired. I climbed the stairs to 3B, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Mrs. Chen from 2A had left cookies outside my door again, wrapped in festive paper, a kind gesture from someone who knew nothing about my bank account and still treated me with basic human dignity. Inside, I hung my coat on the simple wooden rack I'd bought at a garage sale. The apartment was exactly what Kayla had described, 600 square feet of practical living, a couch, a dining table for two, bookshelves lined with business journals and biographies of men who'd built empires from nothing. Men who'd understood that true power wasn't about flashing wealth, it was about controlling information. I walked to the window overlooking the city. Spokane spread out below, thousands of lights and thousands of homes, where families were probably gathering without turning love into theater, where sons didn't collaborate in their father's public humiliation. The bank statements were in my bedroom drawer, monthly reminders of what my practical lifestyle had cost me tonight. Not money, respect, trust. The simple assumption that my own child wouldn't feed me to strangers for amusement. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts. Jim Harrison, my old business partner, Rebecca Walsh, my accountant, Marcus Chen, who'd bought Morrison Construction and still sent Christmas cards. People who knew what Kenneth West had actually built in his 64 years. But none of them were family. None of them were supposed to love me regardless of my address or bank balance. I set the phone on my nightstand and changed into comfortable clothes. Tomorrow was Christmas Day. Bradley and Kayla would probably spend it congratulating themselves on their entertaining dinner party, never wondering if their joke had landed too hard. They thought they knew poor Kenneth West, the financially challenged father who rented a tiny apartment and lived paycheck to paycheck. Tomorrow, I'd start learning exactly who Bradley and Kayla West really were. I dialed Jim Harrison's number at exactly 10:30. 3 days had passed since Christmas dinner, 3 days of declining Bradley's perfunctory, "thanks for coming" text, and letting my humiliation crystallize into something colder, more useful. "Jim, it's Kenneth West. How's retirement treating you?" "Kenneth, good to hear from you." Jim's voice carried the warmth of our 25-year banking relationship. "Can't complain. Golf game's improving, though Martha says I'm driving her crazy being home all day." We exchanged pleasantries about his grandchildren and Martha's garden club. Then I steered toward business. "I'm calling because I'm concerned about my son's financial situation. Bradley, I wonder if you might have any insights." A pause. Jim had handled my construction company's banking for decades. He understood the weight of family financial discussions. "You know I can't give specifics, Kenneth. Privacy regulations and all. Of course, I just want to help if needed, as a father." Another pause, longer this time. "Let's just say, concerns have been raised. Recent concerns." I gripped the phone tighter. "Would this be a temporary situation?" "Hard to say. There are timelines involved, procedures that need to be followed." "What kind of timelines are we discussing?" "Kenneth, why don't we grab coffee? Corner table on Riverside, say 11:30. Some things are better discussed in person." I arrived early, claiming a corner booth where conversation wouldn't carry. Jim looked older than his 68 years, retirement having softened his banker's precision into something more grandfatherly. "Your son and daughter-in-law," he began, glancing around the cafe. "They're in a difficult position." "How difficult?" Jim stirred his coffee methodically. 4 months behind on the mortgage. The bank's been patient, but patience has limits." My coffee grew cold as the full picture emerged. Not through direct statements, Jim was too careful for that, but through careful implications and strategic silences. Bradley and Kayla had a $420,000 house with $380,000 remaining debt. They'd been missing payments since August. The bank was moving toward foreclosure proceedings. How long do they have? 60 days, maybe 90 if they can demonstrate good faith efforts. And if they can't? Jim's expression said everything. Foreclosure auction. Public humiliation. The end of their carefully constructed lifestyle. I thanked Jim and drove home through downtown Spokane, taking a deliberate detour past Bradley's neighborhood. Their house sat pristine on its corner lot, landscaping immaculate, 2 cars in the driveway, a BMW and a new Toyota SUV. Every detail screamed financial success. The disconnect was staggering. They were drowning while maintaining perfect appearances, living a lie so complete they'd convinced themselves it was truth. Back in my apartment, I spread my notes across the dining table. The timeline was clear. Christmas humiliation on December 24th. Foreclosure proceedings beginning sometime in March. 2 to 3 months for them to find $15,000 in back payments plus ongoing monthly obligations. Based on what I knew about Bradley's salary and Kayla's commission work, that would be nearly impossible without help. Help they'd never ask for from their financially challenged father. I picked up my pen and wrote, Morrison Construction, personnel issues. I spread my notes across the dining table the next afternoon, organizing what Jim had revealed alongside what I remembered about Morrison Construction's current structure. When I'd sold to Marcus Chen 3 years ago, he'd kept most of my management team. Tom Rodriguez was still project director. Sarah Kim still handled client relations. More importantly, they still respected the man who'd built the company from nothing. I dialed Tom's direct line. Tom, it's Kenneth. How's the new year shaping up? Kenneth, man, it's good to hear from you. Year's starting strong. We landed that downtown hotel renovation you pitched before the sale. We talked shop for 10 minutes, the easy rhythm of 2 construction professionals who'd weathered decades of challenging projects together. Then I shifted gears. How's my son working out for you? Bradley? The pause was subtle but telling. Bradley's finding his rhythm. You know how it is with family and business. I hope he's not causing problems. I know how important team dynamics are. Nothing we can't handle, though there have been some expense account questions lately, small stuff. Expense account irregularities. My pen moved across the legal pad automatically. Nothing serious, I hope? Look, Kenneth, why don't we grab lunch? Catch up properly. I'm free Thursday around 4 if you want to hit the Onion. Thursday afternoon found us in a private booth at the Onion Bar and Grill, Tom nursing a beer while I stuck to coffee. The lunch crowd had thinned, giving us space for serious conversation. Bradley's competent, Tom began carefully, knows the technical side, understands project management basics. But Tom searched for diplomatic phrasing. Entitled, I guess, acts like the rules don't apply to him. What kind of rules? Expense reports mostly, claiming personal meals as client entertainment. Using the company card for gas when he wasn't on company business. Small amounts, but it adds up. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. The bigger issue is attitude. He talks down to the crew, acts like he's doing us a favor by showing up. Last week he told Martinez, 20-year veteran, that his welding technique was probably fine for residential work. I absorbed this information while Tom continued. We're looking at restructuring some positions in Q1. Market's shifting, and we need people who fit the culture Marcus is building. The implication hung in the air. Bradley's job security was already precarious. I appreciate your honesty, Tom. Family situations can be delicate. Kenneth, you built something special here. Company culture, values, respect for the craft. Bradley doesn't seem to understand that yet. I drove home through the gathering dusk, snow beginning to dust my windshield. The pieces were falling into place with almost mathematical precision. Bradley and Kayla were hemorrhaging money they didn't have, living beyond their means, while his job performance deteriorated. They'd created their own trap. I just needed to spring it. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son was creating problems at the very company I'd built and sold, giving me the perfect leverage I needed, not through lies or manipulation, but by amplifying the consequences of choices he'd already made. Back home, I reviewed my notes one final time. Anonymous complaint about expense account discrepancies, mention of attitude problems affecting crew morale. Nothing false, nothing fabricated. Just truth delivered at precisely the right moment to people who could act on it. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Morrison Construction's main number. I dialed the compliance number from memory. 24-hour hotline, established during my final year as owner when corporate accountability became increasingly important. The phone rang twice before a professional voice answered. Morrison Construction Compliance Line. This is Jennifer. How can I help you? Good evening. I need to report a concern about expense account irregularities. I'll be happy to take your report. Could you provide some details about the nature of your concern? I kept my voice measured, factual. I've observed patterns over several months involving unauthorized personal expenses being charged to company accounts. Can you identify the employee involved? Bradley West, Project Management Division. Jennifer's typing was audible through the phone. What specific irregularities have you observed? Personal meals claimed as client entertainment. Gas charges when not on company business. The amounts aren't huge individually, but they accumulate. Do you have specific dates or amounts? I provided details Tom Rodriguez had mentioned, adding observations from my own knowledge of Bradley's habits. Lunch at expensive restaurants on days I knew he wasn't meeting clients. Gas charges from stations near his house rather than job sites. Are you willing to provide your name for follow-up questions? I prefer to remain anonymous, but I believe this warrants investigation. We take all reports seriously. Is there anything else you'd like to add? The employee has also displayed attitude problems with senior crew members, creates morale issues. Jennifer confirmed the details, assigned a case number, and explained the investigation timeline. 48 to 72 hours for initial review. Full investigation within a week. I hung up and sat in the silence of my apartment. My heart beat steadily. Hands didn't shake. It was done. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen, same sound it made every evening. Outside, snow continued falling past my window, coating the city in clean white that would turn gray by morning. Normal January weather for normal people living normal lives. But Bradley's normal life was about to shift. I wasn't creating lies. Every detail I'd provided was factual, based on information Tom had shared and my own observations. The company's investigation would uncover real irregularities because real irregularities existed. I put on my coat and walked to my car. Driving helped me think, and I needed to process what I'd set in motion. The route took me past Morrison Construction's downtown offices. Security lights illuminated the parking lot where I'd walked every morning for 30 years, building something lasting from concrete and steel and human effort. Now, my son was dismantling his career there, one unauthorized expense at a time. I continued through their neighborhood. Lights glowed warmly in house windows, families finishing dinner, children doing homework. Bradley and Kayla's house looked particularly inviting, Christmas decorations still twinkling despite the calendar showing January approaching. They had no idea what was coming. Not revenge exactly, justice. Natural consequences for choices they had made repeatedly, consistently, without regard for the people they hurt or mocked. Back home, I spread my legal pad notes across the dining table. Timeline clear. Anonymous tip, Monday evening. Investigation beginning Tuesday morning. Preliminary findings by Thursday. Formal disciplinary action by Friday. Meanwhile, their mortgage pressure would continue building. Jim Harrison's 60 to 90 day window was shrinking daily. I reviewed the mathematics of their situation. Without Bradley's income, they'd need approximately $8,000 immediately just to catch up on missed payments. Add monthly expenses, and they'd need continuous financial support neither of their salaries could provide. They'd have to ask for help. The question was, whom they'd ask first. I started the coffee maker for a long evening. The newspaper rustled as I turned the page to the business section. Friday afternoon, January 3rd. Coffee had gone cold in my cup while I read about construction industry trends and quarterly reports from companies I'd once competed against. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I wasn't surprised either. The investigation at Morrison Construction had concluded yesterday. Bradley's suspension would have been implemented this morning. Through the peephole, I saw my son and daughter-in-law standing on my doorstep, both looking strained in ways I'd never seen before. Bradley's usual confident posture had collapsed into something hunched and defensive. Kayla's perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. Bradley, Kayla. I opened the door wider. What brings you here? Hey, Dad. Bradley's voice carried exhaustion. Could we come in? We need to talk. I stepped aside, gesturing toward my modest living room. They settled onto the couch while I took my usual chair, noting how they glanced around the apartment, probably remembering their Christmas dinner commentary about my humble accommodations. Dad, something happened at work. Bradley began slowly, as if the words physically hurt. There was an investigation about my expense reports. I leaned forward with appropriate concern. What kind of investigation? They found discrepancies, personal charges I'd accidentally put on the company card, meals that weren't actually client meetings. It was honest mistakes, but Kayla interrupted, her voice tight. They suspended him, without pay. Oh no? I kept my expression neutral, fatherly. How serious is this? They're treating it like deliberate fraud, Bradley said, running hands through his hair. I don't understand how they even found these things. Someone must have reported me. I nodded sympathetically. These companies have strict policies. What's the timeline for resolution? 2 weeks minimum for the formal review process, Kayla answered. Maybe longer if they decide to involve outside auditors. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. Dad, we wouldn't normally ask, but we're in a tight spot financially. The mortgage payments have been challenging lately, and now, with no income, here it comes, I thought. We were wondering, Kayla's pride clearly battled her desperation, if you might be able to help us out, temporarily, just until this work situation gets resolved. What kind of help? Money, Bradley said bluntly. A loan, maybe $8,000, just to cover the mortgage and basic expenses until I'm back at work. I sat back in my chair, appearing to consider their request carefully. $8,000, exactly what Jim Harrison had indicated they needed for their back payments. That's a significant amount, I said finally. We know it's a lot to ask, Kayla added quickly, though her tone suggested she still viewed me as their last, least promising option. Even part of that would help. I looked between them, noting how their desperation made them forget their Christmas dinner performance. No jokes about my financial limitations now. Kayla, I said gently, didn't you mention at Christmas that I couldn't even afford a down payment on a decent place? Her face flushed. I didn't mean, and Bradley, you said I was financially challenged. Those were your exact words. Bradley's jaw tightened. Dad, that's not fair. We're in a crisis here. I stood up slowly, walking to my small kitchen window. I appreciate that you thought of me, but I'm living on a tight budget myself. Social Security, small savings, barely enough to manage my own expenses. But surely you have something, Kayla pressed. Some emergency fund? I turned back to face them. I wish I could help, but I barely manage my own expenses. You said yourself I was struggling financially. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications they were only beginning to understand. Maybe, I suggested kindly, you should ask someone who has real money, someone who isn't financially challenged. Bradley's face went white. Kayla stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. They left 15 minutes later, their departure marked by stilted politeness and barely controlled desperation. I watched them walk to their car through my window. I folded the newspaper after checking the legal notices, a routine I'd developed over the past 6 weeks. Nothing yet, but foreclosure announcements typically appeared 30 days before auction dates. 6 weeks had passed since Bradley and Kayla's desperate visit. 6 weeks of strategic patience while their situation deteriorated naturally. Time to check in with Jim Harrison. The drive downtown felt familiar, like returning to an office I'd worked in for decades. Washington Trust Bank occupied the same building where I'd conducted Morrison construction business for 25 years. Some patterns never changed. Jim's assistant ushered me into his office, where he greeted me with the sympathetic expression of someone delivering difficult news. Kenneth, I thought you should know about the auction date. I settled into the chair across from his desk. Auction? March 18th, courthouse steps, 10 a.m. sharp. Your son's property. The words hung in the air like smoke from extinguished candles. 6 weeks of waiting, and the timeline was finally crystallizing. How does that process work exactly? Jim explained the procedures with professional thoroughness. Registration required by 9 a.m. Certified funds mandatory for serious bidders. Minimum bid starting at $340,000 due to outstanding mortgage balance plus legal costs. If you wanted to help them, Jim added carefully, you'd need to register as a bidder yourself. Family members can participate. I absorbed this information while maintaining appropriate paternal concern. What exactly does the registration process involve? Proof of funds, valid identification, bidder number assignment. Pretty straightforward if you have the resources. After thanking Jim, I drove to the Spokane County Courthouse. The building stood solid and imposing against the February sky, its steps worn smooth by decades of legal proceedings. In 4 weeks, those steps would host the auction that would complete my son's education and consequences. I walked the perimeter, noting parking availability, sight lines, logistics. Other foreclosure auctions happen monthly. I observed one in progress, studying the crowd dynamics, bidding procedures, winner announcement protocols. Standing where my son's house would be auctioned, I felt the satisfying weight of perfect timing, aligning with careful planning. Back home, I opened my laptop and navigated to Washington State's business registration portal, West Point Investments LLC. The name felt appropriate, a nod to my surname while maintaining professional distance from personal motivations. The formation process appeared straightforward: articles of incorporation, registered agent designation, business address establishment. 2 weeks to complete paperwork, 2 weeks to prepare certified funds and registration materials. I spread my legal pad across the dining table, creating timeline charts and preparation checklists. Business bank account opening, certified funds procurement, auction registration procedures, contingency planning for competitive bidding scenarios. 4 weeks to transform from concerned father to legitimate property investor. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. Kenneth West couldn't afford to help his struggling son, but West Point Investments LLC could acquire distressed properties at below-market prices through foreclosure auctions. Perfectly legal, perfectly logical, perfect justice. I reached for my phone to call Attorney Davidson about LLC formation procedures. I adjusted the rearview mirror to get a better view of their front door. 4 weeks of preparation had led to this moment. 48 hours before the auction, watching my son and daughter-in-law pack their belongings into cardboard boxes. West Point Investments LLC existed now, complete with business registration, bank account, and $400,000 in certified funds. The rental car I sat in was registered to the company, maintaining the professional distance I'd cultivated throughout this entire process. Bradley emerged from the house, carrying a lamp I'd helped them buy 3 years ago. His movements were slow, defeated, like a man going through motions rather than making decisions. Behind him, Kayla directed the placement of boxes into a moving truck with mechanical efficiency. Their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson from Christmas dinner, approached with a casserole dish and sympathetic words. "I'm so sorry this is happening to you both." Kayla's response drifted across the street. "We never thought it would come to this." No, they hadn't. They'd thought their father was financially challenged, incapable of meaningful assistance. They'd thought their expensive lifestyle was sustainable despite mounting debts. They'd thought consequences were for other people. I watched Bradley load their wedding photo, the one from the reception I'd paid for. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were losing the house I'd helped them buy while packing belongings purchased with money I'd provided over the years. A moving truck idled in their driveway, scheduled to remove their possessions before tomorrow's auction. No last-minute miracles had materialized. No mysterious benefactor had appeared with rescue financing. No family member had stepped forward with substantial assistance. The plan had worked with mathematical precision. At 3 o'clock, I drove home to review final preparations. My dining table held everything needed for tomorrow: West Point Investments documentation, certified funds verification, auction registration materials, property information sheets. The business formation had taken exactly 2 weeks, as predicted. Fund preparation, another week. Final logistics and legal review consumed the 4th week. Perfect timing for a 48-hour completion window. I prepared a simple dinner while reviewing auction procedures one final time. Registration opened at 9 a.m., bidding commenced at 10 a.m. sharp. Professional attire, unremarkable appearance, confident but not aggressive bidding strategy. The property was valued at $420,000. Starting bid of $340,000 reflected the outstanding mortgage balance plus legal costs. With minimal competition likely, most foreclosure auctions attracted few serious bidders. I anticipated acquiring the property for significantly below market value. Tomorrow morning, Kenneth West would remain the financially struggling father who couldn't help his family. But West Point Investments LLC would become the new owner of 2247 Cedar Ridge Drive. I selected clothes for tomorrow, business casual, professional, but unremarkable. The goal was to blend into the small crowd of investors and curiosity seekers who attended these proceedings. At 8 o'clock, I reviewed my emotional preparation, maintain professional demeanor during bidding, show no recognition when Bradley and Kayla inevitably attended their own auction, focus on business objectives rather than personal satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice, natural consequences, and the completion of an education that began with Christmas dinner mockery. I set my alarm for 7:30, 2 hours before registration opened. I straightened my tie and picked up the West Point Investments folder from my dining table. Inside, business registration documents, certified check for $400,000, and property information sheets I'd studied until memorization. Everything needed to complete the most important business transaction of my 64 years. The drive to the courthouse took 12 minutes through light morning traffic. I arrived at 8:45, 15 minutes before registration opened, joining a small cluster of people gathered on the steps. 3 others besides myself, a house flipper I recognized from previous auctions, a middle-aged woman who looked like a neighbor, and a younger man in an expensive suit representing some investment group. Minimal competition, exactly as predicted. Registration proceeded smoothly. The court clerk reviewed my West Point Investments documentation with professional efficiency, assigned bidder number 17, and explained the 30-day closing timeline. Certified funds required at closing, title transfer pending standard inspections. At 10 o'clock sharp, the auctioneer called us to order. Property located at 2247 Cedar Ridge Drive, Spokane, Washington. 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath, colonial on 0.3 acres. Minimum bid $340,000 due to outstanding mortgage balance and legal costs. The auctioneer's voice carried across the courthouse steps with practiced authority. Do I hear $340,000? The house flipper raised his hand immediately. $345, I called clearly, my voice steady and professional. The neighbor woman shifted nervously but didn't bid. The investment suit checked his phone, shook his head, and stepped back from the group. $350, the flipper countered, though his enthusiasm had noticeably dimmed. I waited exactly 3 seconds. $355. The flipper studied his clipboard, calculating profit margins against renovation costs. The foundation issues Tom Rodriguez had mentioned during our lunch were documented in the property disclosure. Smart investors knew when to walk away. Any further bids? The auctioneer scanned our small group. Fair warning at $355,000. Silence stretched across the courthouse steps. Spring morning air carried the sound of downtown traffic, normal people conducting normal business, while I acquired my son's house for $15,000 above minimum bid. Sold to West Point Investments for $355,000. The gavel struck the podium with authority and finality. I shook hands with the auctioneer, received preliminary paperwork, and confirmed closing details with the court clerk. Professional transaction completed with the same efficiency I'd brought to construction deals for 30 years. Walking back to my car, I felt the profound satisfaction of a chess game played perfectly from opening to end game. Every move had led to this moment. Bradley and Kayla losing their house to an investment company they'd never heard of, for a price they couldn't have imagined their financially challenged father could afford. The irony was mathematical in its precision. I drove past their house, still technically theirs for 28 more days, noting the moving truck in their driveway, boxes stacked on the front porch. They were already packing, preparing for displacement to some apartment or rental they could actually afford. They didn't know yet who had bought their home. That revelation would come soon enough. I turned the radio on for the drive home. The phone rang while I was reading the business section, 2 days after the auction. Bradley's name appeared on the caller ID, the first time he'd contacted me since their desperate visit in January. Dad, I hate to ask, but we really need help with something important. His voice carried the weight of someone running out of options, pride eroded by months of cascading failures. I set down my newspaper and assumed the concerned father tone I'd perfected over the past 3 months. What's wrong, son? Our house was sold at auction Tuesday. The company that bought it is called West Point Investments. We're trying to find out who owns it, Maybe negotiate some kind of arrangement before we have to move out completely. West Point Investments. I savored the moment, my son asking me to help him contact the very company I owned, seek mercy from the man he'd publicly humiliated at Christmas dinner. West Point Investments? I repeated thoughtfully. That name does sound familiar from business circles. Really? Do you think you might know someone who works with investment companies? We just need to know who we're dealing with. In the background, I could hear Kayla prompting him with whispered suggestions. They were desperate enough to swallow their pride and ask their financially challenged father for help reaching people with real money. I might know someone who has information about them, I said carefully. Let me make some calls and see what I can find out. These investment companies can be hard to track down, but I still have contacts from my construction days. That would be incredible, Dad. We don't have many options left. I suggested we meet in person to discuss the situation properly. Riverfront Park Pavilion, neutral territory where serious conversations could happen without interruption. They agreed immediately, gratitude evident in Bradley's voice. Driving to the meeting, I reviewed my strategy. Gradual revelation rather than dramatic confrontation. Let them understand slowly who held their future in his hands. Let them comprehend the full scope of their miscalculation about their father's capabilities. They were already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a picnic table with the defeated posture of people who'd exhausted their alternatives. Bradley stood to shake my hand, more respect than he'd shown me in years. Thanks for meeting us, Dad. We know this is a lot to ask. Kayla managed a grateful smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. We just need to know who owns West Point so we can try to work something out. I sat across from them, noting how desperate circumstances had changed their body language, their tone, their entire approach to me. No mockery now about my modest apartment or financial limitations. Tell me exactly what you know about this company, I said, pulling out a small notebook as if taking business notes. They explained the auction results, the 30-day timeline, their attempts to research West Point Investments through public records. The company existed legally, but provided no obvious ownership information or contact details. I might be able to help, I said after appropriate consideration. Give me a few days to reach out to my contacts. These investment groups often have complex ownership structures, but someone in the business community usually knows someone. The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. Could you come to dinner at my place Friday evening? I should have information by then, and we can discuss your options properly. They accepted eagerly, thanking me repeatedly for taking their situation seriously and offering to help despite our recent tensions. Driving home, I pulled out my calendar to confirm Friday evening was free. I opened the wine as the doorbell rang, the same vintage I'd brought to their Christmas dinner 3 months ago. Through the peephole, I saw Bradley and Kayla standing on my doorstep, both wearing forced smiles that couldn't quite hide their desperation. Dad, thanks for having us. Bradley's handshake was firmer than usual, respect born from necessity. Behind him, Kayla managed a grateful nod, her usual condescension replaced by cautious hope. Come in, please. I gestured toward my modest dining table, now set with the good china I rarely used. I thought we'd have dinner from Clancy's. Their salmon is excellent. The irony wasn't lost on me. Clancy's had catered their Christmas party where I'd been served as entertainment. Tonight, the same food would accompany a very different kind of performance. Any news about that company? Kayla asked immediately, unable to contain her anxiety. Let's eat first, I said, pouring wine into 3 glasses. Then we'll talk business properly. For 40 minutes, I guided conversation away from West Point Investments, asking about their temporary apartment, their job searches, their plans. They answered politely but impatiently, glancing at each other with increasing frequency. Finally, Bradley couldn't wait any longer. Dad, did you learn anything about West Point? We're running out of time here. I set down my wine glass and regarded them both carefully. Actually, I did learn quite a bit about West Point Investments. They leaned forward simultaneously, hunger in their eyes. I found out exactly who owns the company. Who is it? Kayla demanded. Can we contact them? Are they reasonable people? I folded my napkin slowly, savoring this moment I'd planned for 3 months. You're looking at him. Silence, confused glances between them. What do you mean? Bradley asked. I am West Point Investments. I bought your house at the auction. The words hung in the air like smoke from blown candles. Bradley's face went white. Kayla's mouth opened without sound. What? Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. How? You said you couldn't afford to help us. I never said I couldn't afford it, I replied calmly. I said I was living on a tight budget, which I was, by choice. Kayla found her voice. But we thought you were financially challenged? Yes, I remember your exact words from Christmas dinner. The color drained from her face as memory supplied the details of that evening. Every cruel joke, every condescending comment, every moment they had used my life as their entertainment. I don't understand, Bradley said, running hands through his hair. How did you even know about our problems? The anonymous tip about your expense accounts at Morrison Construction? That was me. His jaw dropped. You got me suspended? You got yourself suspended by falsifying expense reports. I simply made sure the right people noticed. I stood and walked to my kitchen window, the same view where I'd planned this entire sequence of events. I learned about your mortgage problems from Jim Harrison at the bank, your work issues from Tom Rodriguez. Both men still respect the business relationships I built over 30 years. Understanding dawned on Kayla's face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. You knew everything, the whole time. I knew you were living beyond your means while mocking your father's modest lifestyle. I knew you needed help, but were too proud to ask respectfully. I knew you measured family worth by bank account balances. Bradley's voice cracked. Why? Why would you do this to us? I turned back to face them, noting how different they looked now, smaller, humbler, finally seeing me clearly. Because you needed to learn that respect isn't about money. It's about how you treat the people who love you. The silent stretch between us, heavy with 3 months of carefully orchestrated consequences and the weight of family relationships strained to breaking point. What happens now? Bradley asked quietly. I think you need some time to absorb this. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Bradley spoke, his voice hollow with realization. Dad, I had no idea you were capable of something like this. We completely underestimated you, Kayla added, her usual sharpness replaced by genuine humility. Everything we said, everything we assumed about you. I settled back into my chair, watching them process the full scope of what had happened. 3 months of believing their father was a charity case, while he orchestrated their financial education with surgical precision. I never wanted to hurt you, I said quietly. I wanted to teach you something important about family and respect. Kayla's eyes glistened. What I said at Christmas about you being poor, that was inexcusable. I was insecure about our own situation and took it out on you. We both treated you terribly, Bradley added, reaching for his wife's hand. You've helped us so many times over the years. College, the wedding, the house down payment, and we repaid you by making you the butt of jokes. I nodded, appreciating their honesty. The money never mattered to me, but watching my own family use me as entertainment, that hurt more than you can imagine. We're sorry, Dad. Truly sorry. Bradley's voice carried the weight of genuine remorse. What do you want from us? How do we make this right? I had been waiting for this question, preparing my answer for weeks. I want a family relationship built on mutual respect, not financial dependence, not obligation, but genuine appreciation for each other. We want that too, Kayla said immediately. But we understand if you can't forgive us right away. I surprised them both by smiling. Actually, I have a proposal. They exchanged nervous glances. You can live in the house for 3 months, rent-free. Time to find new jobs, get back on your feet financially, rebuild your lives properly. Bradley's face showed complete shock. Dad, after what we did to you, we don't deserve. Family means giving second chances when people learn and grow, I interrupted. You've both learned something important tonight. Now, I want to see what you do with that knowledge. Kayla began crying, not the frustrated tears of Christmas dinner, but tears of gratitude and shame mixed together. You're being so generous after we were so cruel. Consider it a delayed wedding gift I should have given you properly. Use these 3 months wisely. Build something sustainable, something you can be proud of. Bradley stood and walked around the table, pulling me into the first genuine embrace we'd shared in years. Thank you, Dad. I promise we'll earn back your respect properly this time. When Kayla joined our awkward family hug, I felt something shift in my chest, the cold anger I'd carried since Christmas finally melting into something warmer. Money doesn't make you poor or rich, I said as we separated. Character does. How you treat people, especially family, that's what matters. We understand now, Bradley said, and we want to do better. Let's have dinner next Sunday, I suggested. And every Sunday after that, real family dinners where we talk and laugh and respect each other. We'd love that, Kayla said, wiping her eyes. And Dad, thank you for not giving up on us. As they prepared to leave, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes not from victory over enemies, but from the restoration of family bonds that had been broken by pride and misunderstanding. I walked them to the door and watched them drive away, noting how they sat closer together in the car, united by shared humility and newfound appreciation for the man they'd never really known. Justice served, family healing begun. It was enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.